I got it.
Okay, good.
So now we are recording and perfect. All right, go ahead, Amanda.
Okay, awesome. So like I said, I'm going to be talking about feeding our babies today. And it can be a very exciting time. It can be overwhelming. There's a lot of different emotions, maybe some anxiety. And so I want to provide you with just that foundation of information to help you grow your confidence or reassure those moms who are already feeding their babies that, you're on the right track. And along with all of those mixture of emotions, I find moms these days are very bombarded with just opinions, suggestions, ideas. We have our parents, we have our friends, we have social media. And more than ever, I find there's kind of this difference of opinions with how we should be doing this. And everyone's kind of on feeling this extra pressure of feeding our kids versus back in the day, everyone kind of did it the same way. We all gave infant cereal as the first food, and things have really shifted. So I'm hoping to just give you guys that clarification and reassurance on what to do. For those moms who are already feeding their kids, definitely ask me questions if you feel stuck anywhere. I know you probably have the basics down, but I encourage you to just bug me if you have a question on how to progress to a next level or maybe stuck on a certain food or anything like that. Absolutely interrupt me right in the chat box. I find, I can give the basics, but then it's always those individual questions that really matter because that's where people are stuck and that's their unique situation or their child. And I'll go into this where every kid is different. It's not black and white. It's not here's the rule book. You really have to do it based on where your kid is at. And so that being said, I recommend taking notes. I'm such a note taker or a list maker. Because I have mom brain and I am constantly going back to my binder or my notes because in the chaos, in the having to make decisions or meal plan, it's hard to think and it's hard to remember. So just if something stands out to you, jot it down. If you're confused about something, jot it down. If you don't want to ask questions today, that's fine. I highly encourage you to contact me. Even just shoot me an email, be like, these are my 3 concerns, or these are where I'm stuck, and I can just shoot you a response back, or we can work together. Okay, that's enough of the introduction. So before I get into the fun stuff, I just wanted to talk about our recommendations. So we know 0 to 6 months, all baby needs is breast milk with vitamin D or formula. That is giving them the nutrients they need. Then around that 6-month age, so this isn't a rule point. It can be a couple weeks before, it can be a couple weeks after, but we're seeing that around 6 months developmentally, they're mature enough and they have the skills to eat. And we'll go into that a little bit more. And right now, we kind of see that there are 2 approaches to starting solids, and that is spoon feeding and baby-led weaning. And we will talk about both of those. Okay. Has anybody heard of the rhyme, food before 1 is just for fun? If anybody wants to share if they've heard that or if they have an opinion on that, I'll give you guys a second if anyone wants to speak up. So this is a false rhyme, and there's a couple reasons why it's false. And it's interesting because there's a lot of information out there these days that are kind of telling moms to feed their babies. However, I'm still hearing this in circulation. I was in a nursing mom's room before the pandemic hit, and there was these 2 moms talking, and they had older babies, and the mom was like, didn't want to feed her kid, and it was kind of an inconvenience, and they're going on a trip. And she's like, well, food before 1 is just for fun, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm practicing self-control because I will not say anything. I will not speak my opinion, but it was so hard. And it just reminded me that people are often misled, especially when it rhymes. And so just throwing it out there right at the beginning, just because it rhymes doesn't mean it's true. And as the dietitian, I'll say food before 1 is for nutrition. Super important. Babies are changing developmentally. Their stores are depleting. And so we'll get into this. Iron is the #1 important nutrient your babies are going to start to need. However, it's not just about nutrition. Food before one is for allergy prevention. We're going to get into that. Research is showing that we want to introduce those allergenic foods right away. Food before one is for sensory development. They're going to learn to touch and feel and taste and smell and see, and all of this development. Social skills, they're going to learn about family meals right at the beginning, restaurant eating, all that kind of stuff. Language development and routine. Right at the beginning, you can set up a great meal, snack time routine to set them up for mealtime success. Okay, so the pressing question for all new moms, or not even new moms, I found it was different with my second baby. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh my goodness, baby-led weaning or spoon feeding. For some reason, they seem to be on opposite teams, and I'm going to bring them together for you guys. So the truth is, there is not one way that is better than the other. There's not one that's superior. They both have benefits. And if we're going to talk about the right way to feed your baby, the answer is to be a responsive feeder. So that means we are responding to what our baby needs. What can your baby do? Where is your baby at developmentally? So we might, as a mom, have a plan. I had a perfect plan. I'm like, I'm going to do baby-led weaning. I'm going to try it out. And my daughter really struggled with it. And so if I'm going to be a responsive feeder, I'm going to say, okay, you know what? I have this plan. I prepared this food, baby-led weaning style, but she's struggling. So you want to look at, can they palm their food? So they have this palmer grass, or can they palm it? Can they bring it to their mouth? The pincer grasp comes later, and we'll talk about that. Does your baby have a preference? Are they super independent and want to feed themselves? Do they like the spoon? Are they frustrated? I've heard stories where a baby loves to play with their food, can kind of bring it to their mouth, but aren't really getting it in there, and they're frustrated because they're not actually eating. Or I had a friend who, she was like, I'm doing baby-led weaning, and it was more like a way of life and a rule book. And she's like, yeah, my daughter, she's not really eating anything, doesn't really get in her mouth, but we're doing baby-led weaning. And my mind is saying, well, you're not really responding then to what your baby needs, because it's great that they're practicing picking up the food, but they still need to eat some of it. So working with your baby. And so my biggest recommendation, if you're going to take anything from this talk, is do a mixed methods approach. Combine the both. There are benefits to doing both, practicing with both textures. Learning to eat is a lot of work. Your baby is not going to get it like that. Just like crawling, walking, potty training, anything babies do, it takes time, and they're going to develop at their own pace, and their progression could look different. So responding to them, finding that right balance is my biggest message. Okay. So with a mixed methods approach, and that's kind of where my talk will go, is you're offering a variety of textures right off the bat. That can be a pureed, something for breakfast, mashed, lumpy, ground, finely minced, soft finger foods right off the bat. You can prepare it safely for your child. And so, for example, with Holly, as I kind of was figuring her out, and I have it written in my journal, like, will not do finger foods until 9 months. Like, I just had it. She was just struggling. And so I did a lot of mashed foods where I would mash up like a variety of things, vegetables, avocado, chicken, rice, and make it like a little mound on her tray, and she would just kind of grab at it. So it's just working with all these textures, working with what your kid needs. So you might feel ready to start solids. You might be confident, your doctor might have given you the green light, but is your baby ready to start solids? That's Holly. She looks so funny. And it's funny because now she has hair and she's taller. So it's always funny to look back on their baby pictures. A lot of times I hear that doctors give parents the green light right at 4 months old, and they're not even assessing for developmental readiness. So as the parent, that is your guys' job. Even if she's at a certain age, doesn't necessarily mean she's ready. So you might have heard of this before. You want to have them sitting up with minimal support. So that doesn't mean sitting up perfectly. If you have them, for example, on the carpet and you're kind of seeing how they're sitting up, they can have a pillow behind them, or if you hold their thighs. But ideally, you want straight posture. And if you were to put a baby in a high chair that was younger, you would see them leaning. They would be kind of like this. So if they can sit up and lean forward, they got strong posture. They got a good neck muscles. They can move side to side, open their mouth, close their mouth around the food, refuse the food. So there's a bit of that maturity where they're not just looking at you blankly like they have nothing, they have no idea what's going on, but they can say, I'm full, I'm all done. And palming the food. That's that first step with picking up baby-led weaning food, or palming the spoon. Holly always used the spoon herself. I would scoop it for her, but she would grab it and put it in her mouth. So since I want to do mixed methods and encourage both, I want to go into detail of what it is, just in case someone's never really heard of it or are unsure of what baby-led weaning means. And so baby-led weaning is essentially defined as infant self-feeding from the beginning. Baby is eating what you eat. And so we're giving foods in their whole form, like a whole piece of carrot or sweet potato, broccoli. It's whole foods, and they are handheld, so bigger is better. They can grasp it. If you're doing it well, like if you kind of have your own family meals figured out, essentially baby's eating what family eats. You know, sometimes there's a bit of an adjustment where if you have a lot of like spicy foods or takeout, or, you know, you might have to think like, what could I actually take from this meal to give to baby? It's allowing baby to play with their food while they learn to bring it to their mouths. You're not really making baby food, buying baby food. It fits nice with that intuitive eating, division of responsibility we'll get into. And again, it's based on what they can do, not how old they are. So that's kind of how health professionals or nutritionists have defined baby-led weaning. So there are benefits to it. So I just got to move this box. It's mad at me. And I understand why it's kind of taken off, and even why I wanted to try it, and why I think it is important to do along with spoon feeding. And that is right from the beginning, it's pressure-free eating. You know, when we make bowls of food for our kids, we have control. We tend to want them to finish the bowl, and we just kind of keep going, versus you kind of put the food on the tray and they can just go for it. We're not really involved in them feeding themselves. So it's encouraging that independent eating, them learning to respond to what they want right away. It's not going to look perfect. That's why you kind of got to do both. Like I kind of said before, if your family meals are kind of figured out, it could be less time consuming, less expensive, because you're taking from what you're already making. Less pickiness, I do agree with, because if you think of it, when you give your baby whole foods, they're tasting that whole food, versus a blender or a puree or a pouch. There's kind of this bland or one flavor, or they can't distinguish the flavors. It's like, is it sweet? Does it taste like apple? They don't really know. Versus individual foods, like this is what chicken tastes like, this is what actually this tastes like. They're getting that right away. And remember, babies have fresh palates. They don't have any bad experiences or negative feelings towards food. So you can offer them a lot. And I will say variety when you're starting solids or feeding baby, or however old they are. And even for myself, I remind myself, like, I don't like this fruit or vegetable, but I will give it to my kids because they don't have any weird experience with it. They're trying. So she's eating like raw mushroom, like tomatoes and all these things I would never do. But I'm like, good for her. She'll do it. And so I encourage you just to offer those whole foods and a whole bunch of them. Baby-led weaning, again, really good for oral chewing development, hand-eye coordination, all of that developmental stuff. So if and when, because you likely will, do spoon feeding at some point, and that's okay. Because even think of it as adults, we have things like yogurt and smoothies and pureed foods. Like, it's okay. Just some tips though. You want to wait until baby's ready, so we're not ever pressure feeding. Being really careful to watch for those fullness signs. It's recommended that you let the baby remove food from the spoon. So you give it to them, and you're not scraping their mouth or scraping the food off of their face. Let them get messy. Let them feel the food and figure it out. And the most important thing with spoon feeding is you want to progress to other textures quickly. So the thing is, we might start feeding our babies differently. Like how we start could look different. Maybe it's mushed, maybe it's finger food, maybe it's pureed, but they all are supposed to end up in the same place. You know, family meals, finger foods. So it doesn't really matter how we start, but that progression is super important. So no later than 9 months. Otherwise, there are some complications that can arise. Babies can have this really intense preference to liquids or purees. They're going to be behind on that motor development. They could be behind on that pincer grasp. We want them to be maturing and developing at a decent rate. And a little touch on pouches. They do not teach chewing skills in the end. You know, babies are pro suckers. They start sucking in the womb. They suck the breast, the bottle. They don't need any more practice sucking. And so they're convenient. I have them as backup, you know, doctor's appointment or out of the house. Like, that's great. But kids can get weird and they can get very attached to things. And so you never want them to feel like this is some type of go-to. If anything, you know, squirt a pouch in a bowl, add some stuff to it, and spoon feed. And I kind of mentioned this kind of stuff already with how pouches, you know, it's kind of a bland flavor. They're not able to distinguish different tastes. There's not a different texture, all that kind of stuff to kind of consider with pouches. Okay, so how to actually start. So we kind of go over the checklist. Baby's developmentally ready, you do your check. Teeth are not needed. Don't worry about teeth or no teeth. Continue with your breast or bottle feeding schedule. So we're just adding complementary foods. You don't have to adjust that at all right at the beginning. And it's recommended to offer food 15 minutes after a milk feed. You never want your kid to be starving or out of sorts. Like keep it as consistent as possible and then stick him in the high chair and try it out. So yes, the high chair, that's the safest place to feed baby. Right at the beginning, try to include baby at family meal times. That is recommended. They can watch how everybody else eats. They are involved. It's just much more pleasant experience. However, if your baby is just not having it, let them out. You never want them to associate frustration and negative emotions to eating, right? We're trying to make this fun. We're trying to make this, they're learning. It's not forced or pressured or a miserable experience. So as a mom, it can be hard because you're like, they need to eat. But if they're not having it, there could be something else going on. Like they're tired, they have gas. So just adding food to the mixture doesn't need to happen at that point. And a reminder to always feed baby at their own pace. Some kids are fast and they are done. Some will take 45 minutes and just sit there and slowly eat. So never rush your kid. Let them feed themselves at their own pace. So if we're going down to the basics, we're starting. You either put a small amount of food at the tip of a spoon, feed baby or pass the spoon to baby, or put a strip of food that pokes out of the top of baby's hand. I brought food and it's in the fridge to show you guys, but basically they would hold it and this is the part that they eat. So when you think about these wedges, they're not actually really eating the whole wedge in some fancy way. They suck on what will stick out of their palm because all they can do is the palmar grasp. They just kind of awkwardly palm it and suck on the top of that food. So I kind of wanted to show you this visual and kind of how it can look both ways. I'll explain. So this is pineapple. And so this is an example of, I guess, baby-led weaning style of pineapple. And it's showing you, and the ages can vary, right? So we're doing it based on where our kid is at, not necessarily a certain age rule. So around 6 months, 7 months, bigger is better. They can't grab anything. So they'll kind of hold a piece of pineapple and they'll just suck. But then by 7 months, we want them to be palming the food. And by 8 months, because you don't want to ever get stuck at a stage. So you don't want to only offer wedges forever and ever. You want to get them to be able to do that pincer grasp. And that pincer grasp takes practice. It's not just going to happen on its own. So that's when you start to provide smaller pieces of food. It can look a little different. For example, strawberries, we're going to do pureed. That's fine. 6 months-ish, you can offer like a pancake that they can pick up, or you can offer whole strawberries. This made me nervous and I didn't believe it until I tried it, but obviously a big strawberry as a whole, you just plop it on their tray, and she palmed it and she just sucked it. And we are always observing, we are always supervising our children. So if it got too small, I just took it away. But you don't want to just forever give them that big whole strawberry. You want to progress to smaller chopped up pieces to encourage that pincer grasp. I'm going to pause here. Does anybody have any questions? Because I'm just talking to myself. Has this kind of triggered any thoughts? If a question comes up, I want to answer it right then and there.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of ended up doing a combo because I tried baby-led weaning and it worked for a couple things, but a lot of things it just did not work. So it kind of comboed. Now he basically just picks everything up on his own and puts it into his mouth. When and how do you introduce like a spoon for him to use himself?
That's a great question. So honestly, not until 18 months to a year do you need to stress about it. I had those thoughts too. You think like, oh my goodness, like utensil training, like when do I do that? They're not going to, it's totally acceptable for them to feed with their hands until around 18 months, a year or older.
Okay, perfect. That's awesome.
Is fine. Yeah, and then you can kind of have them play with it while still feeding. It will happen on their own pace, but definitely as parents, we kind of have to be intentional. Like if we never give them a spoon, they might be a little behind, but not to stress about it till about a year and a half.
Okay, perfect.
By 2 years old, they should be good.
I'll add to that I found a fork was easier to start with than a spoon because they could stab it or you could put something on it. And so they could direct it to their mouth better. So then they learned that putting things in their mouth with a fork a little bit easier than with the spoon, or like dipping in a yogurt where it's like, oh, there's something on it. I just want to lick it, because they're used to putting everything in their mouth. And so then it just associated it with food.
They have these fancy utensils. I should have brought it. It's called a goo utensil. And it's essentially that where they don't have to scoop anything. It sticks to it. So like you were saying, like if they just kind of stab things and then put it to their mouth, because that skill of it's not gonna come right away. So I can show you guys. I'm gonna send you guys some resources and I can show you guys that. I just got it off of Amazon. And it's a really handy feeding tool to try. Any other questions? Okay, where am I? Okay, just a reminder too, for those moms who haven't tried yet, we're gonna get into like what foods are super important and what to be intentional about. However, for that first try, like one of you guys mentioned, oh, I gave her a taste of this or some broccoli, that's fine. Start simple. We want it to be a pleasant experience. So give the baby an avocado strip, give them some infant fortified cereal, banana, it's okay. Take the pictures, have the good experience, and then eventually we're going to get real good at making sure baby has a balanced meal because there are foods that are very important for the baby. So I had a squish test I wanted to do, but it's in the fridge. Would it be bad if I ran away for 2 seconds?
I'll come bring it to you.
Bring it to me. So it's just in my lunch bag, the square one. Just bring the whole lunch. So this is a really good test. And it might seem like common sense, but even like my dietitian mom brain, I was like, oh, it has a name to it. And so anytime you're cooking baby's food in the whole form, so I'm kind of talking more finger food, whole foods, whether it's roasting a vegetable, steaming a vegetable, sauteing an apple, you always want to do the squish test. And this is to ensure that baby's not going to choke. It is our responsibility to ensure foods are given to here, throwing blueberries. So this is a roasted sweet potato, and it's easy with sweet potato, but you basically, where's the camera? You want to squish it. So you always, when you're cooking your vegetables, can it be squished? Because then in their mouth, it's going to squish in their mouth. So I've cooked carrots and these certain foods, and I'm like, or like a roasted pepper, and I'm like, it's still a little tough. Like, always do the squish test. Same with blueberries. You can, so we're trying to do whole foods. You just squish it and you give it to them like that. So it's not, they're not going to choke on it anymore. It's just squished. So squishing is important. Whether you squish round foods or you make sure anything cooked, especially with things like apple and carrots and those fruits and vegetables that take a bit longer to cook, you got to cook it down beyond maybe your preference of crunchy so that baby can squish it in their mouths. Even things like broccoli, you're going to get that broccoli, you're going to feel that trunk, you got to be able to squish it. Any questions with that? Seems easy enough. Okay. So a lot of questions that, or one of the questions parents kind of come back to is like, well, how much? How much food am I supposed to give this little one? When you're starting out, just start with 1 meal a day. Pick a family meal, like, okay, baby's going to start joining us at dinner time. And then you're gradually going to increase to 3 meals a day and some snacks. You can start with 1 food or a combo. So the old recommendations were 1 food at a time, space it out, you know, wait and see what happens. That's, you don't have to follow that anymore. Allergenic foods are a little different. We'll get into that, but you can offer some banana, some avocado, something. You can offer a blender meal. You can start with however you want. And remember, we're being responsive feeders. So we're letting baby decide how much to eat. We're doing it based on their appetite. If they're hungry, keep giving them more. It doesn't matter how old they are. If they're done, they're done. If you need a starting point, 1 to 2 teaspoons, a few strips is fine. And you can start offering water with the meal as well. Just sips of water in an open cup. And eventually, if you guys want to write this down, you will progress to, at each meal, in the ideal world, at least 1 fruit or vegetable, a high iron food / protein, and a starch or dairy at each meal. And that would be what a balanced meal looks like when you're kind of making their tray. It's like, okay, I got for breakfast, I got a fruit, maybe got some protein pancakes or some yogurt. Like, you're trying to make sure there's that variety and that balance of food. And I don't know if I get into this later, but I'll say this. I might say this later, I can't remember. But with baby-led weaning, what I often see is that, especially on like social media and stuff, when you think about baby-led weaning, people give them strips of like avocado and carrots and toast fingers. And it's like, it's all these like amazing fruit and vegetable finger foods. And you think like, well, where's the protein? Where's the iron? And so as great as fruits and vegetables are, we're going to go into what they really need. And they need that iron, they need that protein. So it can be a little tricky. And I have specific examples because it's way more fun to give your baby fruits and vegetables. I understand that, but meat is very important, or protein, or high iron plant foods, whatever it is. Okay, so this kind of leads into that. So after the basics, there are some things to be very intentional about, and that is iron, added salt and sugar, choking allergies, and nutrient boosters. How am I doing for time? Doing okay. It's lots of information. That's why you guys got to take notes. Okay, so iron. We now know iron is so important. The health professionals have figured this out, that they have changed our recommendations, our feeding baby recommendations, to say meat and other high iron foods are the first foods introduced before anything else. That's like the guideline. Like, don't give them vegetables, don't give them fruits. You better give them meat and other high iron foods. And versus the old recommendation where it was kind of like meats was last. And so they've realized that they got to throw that in the guidelines, because babies 7 to 12 months old need more iron than a grown man. So they require 11 milligrams a day. A grown man needs 8. And that's because babies are rapidly growing, whereas men or women are done growing. And so it's a very specific nutrient need that we need to be intentional about. And unfortunately, iron deficiency anemia is very prevalent. Lots of babies, lots of kids, lots of toddlers have it. It's completely preventable. And unfortunately, a severe deficiency can cause growth stunting, hair loss, cognitive issues. It's serious. It's not something that we just kind of wait and see what happens, or hope they get their iron. As parents, we are responsible for providing our children with food, and we decide what they eat. So we have to make those decisions of what foods are important for them. Okay, so since iron is so important, I have a couple of slides on it. So just laying it out there. So iron is a mineral. It's found in both animal and plant foods. Our bodies naturally love the iron found in animal products. It's just more bioavailable. We absorb more of it. It is found in plant foods. There's these factors and these substances that interfere our bodies from taking it in. So I highly encourage, not to restrict baby. I know people have different lifestyles, vegan, vegetarian, and I could work with you to make sure baby's getting their iron needs, but ideally you're giving baby everything. One trick you guys might have heard about in other classes is to offer vitamin C rich foods with your plant sources of iron. So for example, you give baby iron fortified infant cereal. That is a plant source of iron. We're not absorbing it as amazingly as the other one. But if you say blend a pouch that's rich in vitamin C in your infant fortified cereal or fruit or something, that helps our bodies absorb it more. Okay. So specific iron food ideas, because I know it's not always helpful when we're like, iron is found in beef, and it's like, great, what do we do with that? So I can send you guys this list, but just showing you, like, it can seem daunting and overwhelming, and especially like protein foods, meat for our babies, but it can happen at each meal. So for breakfast, we do protein pancakes. And this is a recipe I followed over and over. I did 2 bananas, 3 eggs, a half a cup of oatmeal flour. If you don't have oatmeal flour, you can just blend like large flake oats. And that's going to be a source of iron because egg yolks have iron in it. And then you could do mini meatloaves, meatballs, casseroles with beans. You can make a hummus. You can offer it on a loaded fork, just like blueberries. You kind of squish the beans like a kidney bean. Shrimp cakes, tuna cakes. You could do a blender meal. You make a whole chicken for your family or chicken breast, and you throw it in the blender with some steamed apple and cooked vegetables, and you have, if you're wanting to spoon feed, muffins with infant fortified cereal, etc. So there are ways. So when you think iron, just try to think protein, and you typically will line it up with what your baby needs for that. I'm going to give you some specific chicken examples just because this one can be kind of intimidating. So you can serve chicken in a variety of ways. If you puree your chicken, you can spoon feed it. You can spread it on toast or mix it in with other recipes like a marinara or some pasta. Like babies don't know what you're doing. You can kind of mix it in to get that iron in various ways. Shredded chicken. So think like slow cooked chicken, or if you actually shred it. I've heard people using like a cheese grater and shredding the chicken. It, again, might be based on baby's preference. Some kids like their chicken plain, some kids like their chicken with flavors. My daughter, I still have such a hard time with chicken with her. Chicken drumstick, I don't know if you guys have seen that. There are babies who just gnaw on a chicken drumstick. Just make sure you remove the skin, any visible cartilage, obviously take it away once they get down to that bone. Ground chicken, meatballs, any shape, and chopped chicken. That's not until around that 8 to 9 month age when we're practicing that pincer grasp. Okay, I wanted to do a little slide on infant fortified cereal just because I find it's kind of mixed. I find it's been a bit disregarded because people are now offering whole foods to baby, which is amazing. Like if you think about it, we're realizing that iron is found in lots of things and babies can have whole foods, but that's not to say that infant fortified cereal is unnecessary or bad or stuff like that. So if we think back to history, it was brought into our food market to serve a very specific purpose, and that was to give babies iron. If you look at the research, a lot of children were struggling with iron deficiencies. A lot of kids were sick, and so they say, how do we solve this problem? We're going to put iron in this baby cereal, and we're going to tell everybody, the recommendations were, give your baby infant fortified cereal. And your parents or grandparents might know the name Pablum. That was like, give your baby Pablum. That's what they all say. Most babies accept infant cereal. It's very convenient, it's affordable, and it's great. However, we now know that there's a couple things. So it's not exposing them to foods the family's going to be eating. Remember, we're talking about that texture, that taste, or wanting them to progress. 2, there's a lot of information right now about rice products and arsenic levels. So I would say if you're going to do infant fortified cereal, buy a variety of grains. Don't just do rice, or avoid rice altogether. Do barley, do oat, do something else. But I do feel that infant cereal has its place. You know, like I said, you can, I don't know if I gave this example, but you can mix it with a pouch. So you put it together and you kind of make a quick breakfast, or you can use it in muffins or use it in pancakes, use it sprinkled on something. So it still has nutrients. It has that iron we need. So it's an excellent backup plan for sure. Quick thing on salt. I know that's this is something that a lot of parents kind of might worry about. No added salt for baby. Kidneys can be damaged from excessive salt intake. It's not to panic about salt altogether. Just like us, we need salt. There's salt in breast milk, formula, salt naturally found in food. It's just that extra salt. So remove their portion before salting. If you're making like a spaghetti or a chili or something, buy low sodium canned products or no added salt products. If you're sharing a family meal and it has salt, don't panic. That one meal is not going to harm baby. Remember, we look at it overall. We look at how baby has been eating all week. Is there excessive salt every single day, or is it that one meal? And again, be most careful with packaged and processed foods. So it's like those breads, muffins. If you give baby store-bought muffins, they are extremely high in salt. Nut butter, canned food, store-bought baby food, etc. Is where you're going to see that salt intake. Just showing here that there are lots of ways to flavor foods. Babies at 6 months and on can have all the herbs. Some kids like spicy foods right at the beginning. That is okay. And a little blurb on sugar. Remember, no honey for the first year. And the recommendations say no added sugar until 2 years of age. So again, it's just a guideline, it's not a rule. And I find, especially if you have older kids, it's pretty much impossible, because I would never recommend that the 3-year-old or the 5-year-old gets the cupcake and the 1-year-old doesn't. Like, that's not good messaging. You know, right away we're showing them that we enjoy food, we enjoy treats. It's just as the parent kind of monitoring, like, you know, the 2-year-old doesn't need juice, doesn't need ice cream. Let's just try to not have any added sugar, but never make it a big fight or anything. Choking. So not a fun little blurb, but I find this is the one that scares parents the most. Holly gave me so many scares. I was just such a, I just can't handle it. I can't handle the gagging noises. So there is a difference between choking and gagging, and I got very much more confident in that. But choking, there was a study that showed this is the main reason why parents are not wanting to do baby-led weaning, because they just think like the whole food, big piece of strawberry, they're going to choke on it. Now, some babies will not have any gagging or choking problems with baby-led weaning. It's how you prepare it, it's what your baby can do, etc. So if you do it safely, it should not be a problem. And just a reminder, choking is the actual airway obstruction. So the baby is silent, not coughing, not crying. There's a difference. Gagging is super normal. I was reassured this over and over. As they learn to eat, it's basically guaranteed to happen. They're just trying to figure out how to move that food around. They have a very high and sensitive gag reflex, and that protects them. So it's likely they're gonna gag. But always just listen to that sound. I would look in her mouth and I would just see the food like basically tickling that gag reflex. And I'm like, what are you doing? Just spit it out or move it to your cheek. And so they have to practice. Like I said, this is such a learning experience for them. but there are ways to minimize the risk of choking. So we always make sure baby's sitting up. They are never ever alone, because even with foods properly prepared, pureed foods, choking can happen. Don't let them crawl, walk around. And again, it's always great to arm yourself with CPR skills. So these are the following recommendations until your kid is actually 4 years old. And so foods that must be modified: hot dogs, whole nuts, whole grapes, carrots, you gotta cook them. Apples, they say cook them or grate. Hard pears, raisins, whole olives, marshmallows, etc. So foods that should be avoided completely: whole large seeds, popcorn, candy, gummy, sticky candy, gum, hard chips, should be avoided completely. This is just a little thing on infant choking. I highly recommend you taking an infant choking CPR thing and not just, having these slides, because unfortunately in an emergency, as parents, we don't think very clearly. It's more panic, and we're not thinking about these steps unless we are properly trained. It might come to us a little better, but just remember, no noise, look in the mouth. If you can't see it, pull it out, call 911, of course. You put baby face down and you pat their back. You never give them abdominal thrusts, is basically the gist of it. You're just hitting their back. And 911, of course, would also tell you what to do.
I'll just throw in for 1 second. We have a video on what to do with choking that I can send you guys as well. That is from the local CPR first aid training place in town. And so we can send you that to see the visual with an actual baby of how to do it.
Yeah, that would be awesome, because it's just, you might think you know the steps, but there can be a lot of panic. So the more you prepare yourself, the better. Throwing up is completely normal. That can kind of happen with gagging. And if they throw it up, that's great. It's out. You don't have to worry about it. Allergies. So this is another one that a lot of parents kind of question, kind of the rules, and rules are kind of changing with these allergenic foods. And so right now, the research is supporting that these 8 allergenic foods are introduced right away. So right when you start your feeding journey, these foods need to pop in and make an appearance as soon as possible. If, however, your baby is at risk, so they've struggled with eczema, they had some type of reaction to your breast milk or formula, if they have a sibling or a close relative with an allergy, talk to your doctor first. That game plan might look different. But for everybody else, you want to introduce 1 allergenic food at a time. So that's where the 1 rule comes in. You can mix an allergenic food with a non-allergenic food, but don't put 2 together, if that makes sense. So we're doing peanut butter, not with eggs. We can do peanut butter with toast and with fruit and with all that stuff. I highly recommend kind of making that checklist and making sure you're knocking off these allergenic foods, offer it a couple times, maybe for a few days, and then do the next one. Okay. Again, there are reactions that would require immediate medical attention. So anything that's going to affect their respiratory system and their breathing, swallowing, hives, if they're looking super puffy, always call 911 if you're concerned. This is one of those things where you don't kind of wait to see what happens. Intolerances look different. That's usually GI. So that constipation, diarrhea is not a medical emergency. It might just be baby's gut kind of getting used to it, maybe an intolerance, and so forth. Other considerations, we are almost done, I promise, is that, so the first one is you will definitely see baby's poop change. It's a guarantee. So versus breast milk formula fed babies, the color, the smell, the consistency, the frequency, everything changes about baby's poop. And so just know that, so first, constipation after starting solids is super common. And it can be because of a couple things. So first you have to think baby's gut has only been dealing with fluids. And so it just takes some time for it to get used to it. And constipation is different than a lack of bowel movement. So if baby stops pooping 3 times a day, that's okay. Constipation is when baby's in pain and can't pass the stool, or it's hard stool. So just watch, like, is baby straining, crying, in pain, Or has the frequency just kind of changed and is adjusting slowly to this new diet? There are, of course, foods that promote laxation. Think anything with the letter P: prunes, pears, peas, plums, etc. And if that became a serious-ish concern, contact me and I can give you more constipation kind of tips. Drinking water from an open cup can be introduced at the same time we introduce solids. We want to say open cup. We don't want them to be starting with a sippy cup. You just help them take that glass. With whole milk, the recommendations are don't offer whole milk, cow's milk, until after the introduction of iron-rich foods. Cow's milk doesn't have any iron. The calcium competes with the iron absorption, and we know how important iron is, and kids tend to love milk, and they can fill up their tummies with milk, and then it can kind of displace all the other good foods. And so never more than 2 to 3 cups a day, and not until, again, that solid food, those high iron foods are well established. Plant-based milks are not recommended. That's kind of a whole talk on itself. And juice, high sugar, all that kind of stuff we talked about, not recommended with the young baby. A little tip on nutrient boosters. You can kind of amp up that puree, pouches, yogurt, infant cereal with hemp hearts, chia seeds, and flax. So for example, you do a little bit of applesauce, add some hemp hearts, and that's giving them that iron, bit of protein, omega-3s. Just kind of ways to almost make it a little bit more nutritious or balanced versus like just something that's more sweet or carb rich. You can also, so banana is very hard for baby to pick up. You can roll the banana in infant cereal, hemp hearts to make it more, they can grip it better. Same with an avocado. So anything slippery, you can roll it in one of these nutrient boosters. Like I said, with the infant cereal, think of it more as a nutrient booster. You can add it to muffins. I can send you guys muffin recipes, biscuit recipes, pancake recipes. You can mix it in with a cooked egg, mix it in with peanut butter. So that first time you're going to introduce baby to that peanut butter, you can make in your infant cereal and put a big tablespoon of peanut butter in it and make it kind of a peanut buttery cereal. Okay. This is a resource I'm going to get to you guys. It's offered through Feeding Littles. Highly recommend you guys check them out on Instagram. They're dietitian and an occupational therapist working together. And this document is called Offer the Rainbow, and it goes over each color of food and how to prepare it. And it's a free resource. And so, for example, they say red bell pepper, what to do for babies 6 months and toddlers. And it is baby-led weaning style. That's kind of how they're talking about these foods. But it's a good reminder, because even when I'm meal planning or grocery shopping, you kind of forget, like, okay, what should I add to the list? What have we tried? Oh, you know, my baby hasn't tried raspberries yet. Let's do that this week. And so it kind of helps you think about foods, because like I said before, variety when they're young is so important, because it's such a special time to introduce them to a whole bunch of foods before they get picky. So just that checklist, remember, child is developmentally ready. Number 1, we are never offering choking hazardous foods. Baby's always sitting upright in a high chair. Iron-rich foods at every meal if you can, maybe 2 meals a day. If that 3rd meal is kind of tricky, we're avoiding high salt, processed foods, sugary foods, and we want to make sure foods are prepared properly. That's our role when we're making anything. We do that Squish test. It is texturally appropriate. Just want to show you guys these ladies. So Happy Healthy Eaters, some Manitoba dietitians have created this amazing page, and their thing is feeding babies. That's all they do all day, every day. And so they have some recipes online. They have they share little tips and tricks all day on Instagram if you guys want to check them out. And I just put this kind of together as like a baby's first grocery list. And I wanted to kind of keep it up here for a second if you guys had any questions on a certain food specifically, on either how to prepare or what to add it with. This is pretty much it for my presentation. And so you guys can ask questions now.
I have a question.
Hmm.
Like we've been doing the open cup with Tobias, but like since he started solids, but like the last couple months, then he just won't drink from it, or he'll take like the tiniest sip, where like just this last week, then we started doing a sippy cup instead, and then he'll actually drink water. Is it more important to keep with the open cup so that he gets used to that, or is it more important that he actually drinks some water?
And he is almost 1, you said?
Yeah.
Really the next step to kind of get him to would be a cup with a straw. Once they're at that 1-year age, if you want to
Okay.
not do sippy, but kind of a straw is okay. Remember, these are just guidelines and we want to tailor it to our child. And if you've done kind of an open cup for the last 6 months, that's awesome.
Yeah.
You know, they're learning that skill. You could take a break from it and then kind of reintroduce it. Is he drinking any milk, or how is he taking his milk?
He just breastfeeds.
Okay. Yeah. So you can take a break from it. Sippy cup with a straw is okay, because remember, you know, life isn't always perfect and we're not always home. And so if we're out of the house, we're at the zoo, we're going to have a sippy cup, we're going to have a cup with a straw. It's going to happen. That's okay. It's more just not skipping that open cup step entirely. Some parents just don't do it at all. If you've already kind of established that, totally okay to kind of do what your baby or your child needs right now.
Okay.